All right, hey everybody. My name's Adam Scott, and I'm D&D Club, and I'm with my friend here, Bryan. Bryan, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Bryan. Very good.
Perfect.
Bryan Weiss with RPG and Company.
So,
Happy to be here with.
so we're here together. We're Bryan and I have been working together on and off on various projects for a while, and the idea that we've had in our brains is some kind of collaboration where we put together some kind of podcast that builds both our communities together as well as other people in the D&D fandom or just fantasy, sci-fi, RPG um, interests in general. So we've been working together for when did we first start working together? How long has it been?
Um, I mean, has it been over a year already?
It might be
I
because I
think it
think it
might
was like
be.
last summer, more than
Yeah,
that maybe that we chatted the first time. Where are you based out
yeah.
of?
I'm in Chicago.
Nice. I'm in Dayton, Ohio. So we're different time zones, but still closer than some may be to each other. What we're doing
Different
with
time
it?
zone, same
Say again?
different time zone, same climate.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, man. So what we want to do with this is our trial run. We're recording this, and then we're gonna put it up. So if you're watching this, you're watching what is hopefully not something that's too terrible. We want to do a Q&A for some of our following, and then put it up on our two Twitch channels, and then eventually we're going to build into live casting through in collaboration with each other as well as maybe some other partners. So I've got a list here, Bryan. Do we want to go through the list first, or do we want to talk about like how we like our backgrounds, like our sites and our.
Sure.
You want to
Let's
start, man?
let's
Go
start
for it.
there.
Talk about RPG&Co. Tell me what I know
All
and what I
right.
don't know.
Okay. I will give you the rundown as quickly as I can, but still provide you with detail if I'm droning on, then throw something at me digitally. I have been playing D&D since I'm gonna date myself, the early '80s, and basically, yeah, for that long I've been playing. I was out of it for a number of years when kind of life took over, and then about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, decided to get back in it with my old high school buddies. Um, and we just decided, hey, let's start playing D&D again. And during this time, so I work in advertising. That's my day job,
Yeah.
as a designer, brand builder, whatnot. During that time, I started getting a little jaded with work, shall we say. And I was looking for ways to kind of bring more passion into my day job. And a couple things happened. One is I ran into another guy that I went to high school with, who's also into D&D, although not in my circle back then. But I hooked up with him on Facebook, and we started talking. And he had quit his job at Microsoft or Google, one of the two, same, and started a game store in Oregon, and bought the license to do some 3D printing, and he's been making a go of that for a while. And I thought, that is really cool.
Yeah, for sure.
And it started getting me thinking that in today's world, if you told me back in 1981 that you could make a living off of D&D, I would have said that you were insane.
Yeah, for sure, man.
Lo and behold, look where we are. Another thing is I actually met Matt Mercer at C2E2 in Chicago,
Oh, nice. How
and
is he? Like, did you get to sit down
that's
with him for a little bit, or was it like a meet and greet?
I I was no, I was just an autograph signing, but for as big as a nerd that I am, I never really went to conventions, comic book conventions, game conventions when I was a kid. Just not my thing, standing in
Yeah.
line all day.
Yeah.
But you know, this happened at about the time that I was trying to figure out again how to kind of meld hobby and career together. And I said, fuck it, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna stand in line and meet Matt Mercer. That's why I'm going to C2E2. And I stood in line for 4.5 hours, and happened to be neither here nor there, but just a detail. They split the line up into three, and I was at the front of the third line. So I was literally 5 feet from him for 4 hours, watching him
Does he
interact
smell
with
famous? Did you get a good whiff? Was it like, oh, he's the legend?
I will tell you that he is one of the most humble, sweetest, genuine people I have ever met. Like he is, everybody knows how creative he is, but he is so like just overcome with joy and passion for what he has been able to bring to people. And I told him that, and I told him, how it's kind of jump started me back into D&D, and I mentioned what I do. Long story short, he had me talk to their wonderful head of marketing, and one thing led to another, and I did a bunch of design work for Critical Role over the past couple of years, which was awesome.
That's so cool. 'Cause
Um,
I remember when we
so
first started talking, we were talking about D&D and figuring out just how to work together and what how we could complement each other with our skill sets. And I remember you shared your packet, your graphics package you did for them, and that's just so cool that you guys are able to work with
thank you.
them. That's just really
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was like, honest to God, doing a T-shirt design for them and telling and getting that first call saying, "Yeah, we're going to use your T-shirt design," was the highlight of my design career.
no, absolutely.
I don't know if that's a great thing or if that kind of says something about my career,
Well, it's like
but
getting
I
called up to
mean,
the big leagues, in terms of the sports metaphor
it
that
was.
we in the D&D
Yeah,
community there is a hierarchy, I think, whether or not we people want to acknowledge it, and there's a professional space that people are in, and gaining access to that professional space or being welcomed into it or being able to collaborate with professionals is really exciting because this is it's something that I grew up just nerding out in my buddy's rec room, trying to convince them to play, and it just was so hard to get them to get into it. They were like, "Well, how do you win, man? How do you win?" I'm like, "No, no, it's kind of like Star Wars. We
yeah,
tell each other, a story." And they're like, "Well, I don't care about that. I want to know how. Like, what do I roll to win? How do I succeed?" And I'm like, "Oh God." So, being able to become and work in the professional space with that, I think, is really really cool. And it's
yeah, and it was
powerful.
like it is, and it was because it was that first instance of, okay, I have brought my passion into my, one of my outside passions into my career, and that's why it was awesome. They truly are just fantastic. They're doing great things. So anyway, all this kind of happened at the same time, and I started DMing for my original crew, which I never did. It was years since I had done. I was always usually playing. Um, and I just decided, hey, I wanna bring my design work into the community and see what happens. So I started RPG and Company without a very strict kind of set of goals, which is kind of breaking the rules to coming up with a business plan. But it can also be a hurdle at times to getting started, and I wanted to avoid that. So I basically just told myself I'm going to let this grow organically,
Sure.
and it's been a couple of years now, and I've met you, I've met Malcolm, General Game Master, and so many wonderful people online that it's just kind of it's done that organic growth, and now it's time to take it to the next step, which is what we're trying to do here, and kind of branch out. So
You
I've talked way too long about
No,
that.
man. No,
So
the thing you mentioned that I think really resonates with me as well is like I've met so many interesting people since I started an Instagram account that was I don't know, it was like 4 or 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, but it was just me posting like pictures of my comic books and little stupid
mhm,
nerd things. It wasn't really intended to be a D&D account. And so I started in that fashion, and then eventually I realized that there was a D&D community out there that I could be a part of, which was cool, which I liked. And so the point of all that is eventually as I grew my Instagram, I met like all these really interesting people that are really talented I would never have met otherwise. And I think um, that's a really unique thing to the age in which we're living. And I know, I have my feelings about social media and about technology in our lives, but I think that's a really positive outcome is being able to meet people like yourself. Like you said, Malcolm, we both know Malcolm, Gentleman Game Master. One of the people on my Instagram, Epic Jim, lives up in Canada. And I initially met Jim when I sold Jim some minis. And I just like, Jim just like buys everything. And I mean that in a good way. And I was just like trying to figure out how to monetize this. And
I've seen I've seen his pictures of his Fungin, and I am still in awe
oh,
of
I
the
know.
amount of
He has
crap
like he's got to have
that
like the most
camera.
understanding, awesome wife in the whole world because
Oh
his
my
Fungin
God,
is just
yeah,
out of this world. But
yeah,
I sold him some minis, and we just started chatting about D&D, and it eventually led up to where I ended up having some kind of collaboration with Malcolm, Jim. There was Chris Solo out in on Fable 42's channel. Who else was a part of it? Oh, Cameron from D&D Coalition. And so it's like
mm,
all these people that I would have never met. I've been able to connect with, and they're all really unique people, and that's something I really like about doing this and doing this kind of. I guess it's turning into work, but it's good work. It started as a hobby, and now it's becoming a job, which is I love it. I love the fact that we can connect and talk about things that we like and bring people in.
yeah.
So
Ellen, like you said, I mean, the fact that the fact that we can all come together. I mean, again, I'll go back to when I was a kid. Back then it was like, oh, I play with my four buddies in the basement, and God forbid you tell anybody you play D&D.
yeah, don't share that with
Um,
anyone.
yeah, exactly. And now it still blows my mind that people are like, oh, you play D&D? I've always wanted to play from everywhere. I've
It's
always wanted to play that.
the
I have
180
parents
degree.
from
Oh,
my
it's
kid's
crazy.
school, and yeah, it's just and the really interesting thing that I found over the past year, obviously, it's just weird that all of this is happening together, and especially in the environment of the last year with COVID and having to do this remote. It's a funny thing. So my high school buddies and I, when we started playing, uh, like I said, maybe 3, 4 years ago, we started up again, and we would meet out in the burbs. Most of us were still here. One of the guys moved away, so we set up a whole remote streaming um, setup well before COVID, like a year before. We had the camera
Nice.
set up, the map cam had everybody dialed in, just because we still, we finally got back into it after a 20-year hiatus or more, and we still wanted to play. So when COVID came along, I was like, oh my God, I'm already set up for this. I know how to do this stuff.
You use
And
one thing
it's
I like about your
really
setup. You use Tell me about your setup because it's different than most people and how they play digitally.
okay.
What kind of resources do you use besides just like a Zoom
So
camera or Zoom
Okay,
program?
so I run it on Zoom. I just think, as a video tool, Zoom is pretty seamless. And then I've got three cameras, one on me, one overhead map camera. So I use a traditional gridded map. I tend to use dry erase, but I'm kind of building up 3D add-ons, if you will. And then I've got one like low bird's eye battle view camera. So I set up three Zoom accounts, got three webcams. Actually, I use my phone for one, and then a couple of webcams, and then everybody dials in, and then I can pin. I usually pin the big map, or I pin the two battle maps side by side. And I
Nice.
tell people if they, I generally use D&D Beyond for character tracking because it is freaking amazing, and it's just getting more amazing. But I tell people as far as dice goes, if you want to roll your own dice at home, because I do,
Yeah.
I mean, after spending $400 or whatever the hell it is on dice over the years, probably even more,
Mortgage payment
I'll
on
be damned if
dice.
I'm not going to use them. I'm like, if you want to cheat, that's your prerogative. I got plenty of ways I can kill you as a DM. If
Yeah.
that's the way
See,
you want to go.
that's what's crazy.
But
I've never understood that. That like the players who fudge the dice rolls on their end because it's like, oh really? Like you've rolled like
we should,
nothing lower
we
than an
should,
18 for the past 7 rolls.
yeah,
Wow. Well, must be
we
good.
should save that
I'm
as
gonna
an
go on a
actual
hot streak
topic,
now. Yeah, that should be a
right?
whole
We
other.
should
That should
save
be like
that
an
as an
hour.
actual topic
Yeah.
for a show. It's
Yeah.
like the need to OP yourself. That's a good. Let's table that one
Yeah.
because that's a
We'll do that
whole
for like an hour
discussion.
or more. So
Right,
here, let
right.
me ask you
But
something else, man. Hold on. Let me do this. There's someone who wants. This one was somebody asked a question from my IG. I thought this would be a good one to throw your way, and then we can talk about it. Like, so how do you? What ideas do you have to hook players who, um, may you think might be interested in D&D, but they have they're new to it. They have no idea what it is. How do you make that sales pitch to hook new people? to try to build your group? Like if you're the one who's into it and you want to bring in new people, what observations or suggestions do you have?
Invite them over for a drink, tie them up, shove them in the basement, and lock them down there until they play.
Just be like, no, you're doing
I
it.
think
You're doing it,
so.
man.
I I think the biggest hurdle to people getting into it is that they just well, there's two, and they kind of go hand in hand. One is I have no idea how to play or how to get started. Okay, what
Yeah,
do I need? What books do I buy? How do I, what are the rules? How complicated is it? The other
I
one
hear that a lot. I hear that a
is
lot
that
from people.
a, yeah, a lot of people just don't really know what a role playing game entails. Like you said, how do you win? What do I do? You mean there's no board, there's no, um, you know what I mean? It's less
Sure.
tangible, and a lot of people have difficulty wrapping their mind around that. So I generally explain to them, you are basically telling a story and writing it, and you guys as players are writing it as we go along. So I, as a DM, if we take it from a DM standpoint,
Sure.
I basically tell them, I am a storyteller and I am telling almost like a choose your own adventure. And you guys are the readers and you are choosing your own adventure. Okay. So you react and live within the story that I tell you, and I adapt that story to the decisions that you make. Other than mechanics, there are no rules beyond that. So it is literally just storytelling is the simplest way to explain it. And then I tell them, the most basic rundown is it's in a fantasy setting. You choose what race you are, like, human, elf, dwarf. That the most people are familiar with that. You choose
Yeah,
what your job
The
is.
Tolkien
You are,
setup.
right. Are you a fighter? Are you a magic user? Yada yada. Okay.
I want to
And
be a
then
fighter
from
with the
there, I
magic
say,
user.
I'm
That's like
triple multi-classing.
I want to be a fighter that also casts fireballs. I'm like, okay, let's back up.
Now you're talking about the way I used to build characters. I
Yeah,
want a guy that can do everything and has all these needs.
yeah,
Um, and basically, so you pick who you are, you pick what you do, and then you roll up a bunch of scores and you dive in and play. It is not a game, in my opinion, where you sit down and read a rule book. The easiest way to get into it is to tell people, look, we've got people who are more experienced. We'll all work and walk you through the process and work on developing a character. And the easiest way is just to do that and dive in and play, and you'll get an understanding for how to play. And then there are deeper conversations on, are you outgoing and do you want to really try role playing, or are you more laid back and you just kind of want to, be the mysterious stranger in the back, who kind of observes more. And then, there are conversations about that. Do you want to play you, or do you want to play someone who is not you in real life? I mean,
sure.
I mean, we could talk about this for hours, which I'm sure we will.
And the thing with new players that or people that are like I call them RPG curious. Just it's like they're
Mhm.
tiptoeing around it, and I feel like it's a curiosity about something that is actually quite old, which is person to person storytelling, like the sitting around the campfire just talking and telling stories. That's a really old human thing that goes back generations, if not centuries.
Yeah.
But I think it's so different than what most people do today. That idea of like, hey, we're just going to sit together, we're going to be together, we're going to tell a story, and like you mentioned,
Mhm.
it's not a game where you have to learn rules. And I get so many new players that are like, well, I don't want to mess up. And I'm like, oh, this is the one thing in your life you don't have to worry about messing up doing. Like,
Yeah.
literally, it's really hard to screw this up as long as you go into it with good intent and an open mind and a willingness to, at least in my
Yeah.
opinion, to take a little bit of risk and get into character and try to just have fun with it.
Mhm.
Um,
That's a very good point. That's another thing that I get. You're right. Is from people say, I don't want to do it wrong, or I don't know how to do it. And that's a good answer. It's like there is no wrong way to do it.
no, there's no wrong way. And the thing too with new players, I like to share with them. Think of your favorite fantasy movies, if you're doing sci-fi, because you can role play, in any environment or any setting. Think of whatever story you like, and if you don't know what to do, just bring that into the role playing conversation. Because that's really, to me, role playing is just a conversation, and then we have dice, so there's some element of randomness to it that we can build statistics out. But it's like I have one guy that I've worked with for a long time. He just loves Han Solo. So anytime he gets into a game, like he's just Han Solo. It doesn't matter what he's doing, he's Han Solo. He could be a rogue in a D&D game. We played a Star Wars game once, and we redid a cantina scene, and all he wanted to do was shoot somebody that looked like Greedo. And he was so freaking happy with that. And then he was like, it kind of like made my last 20 years that I was able to do that. Like really, I was able to relive that moment. So like being able to just be a part of those stories, to me, that's what's so much fun about it. And I would pitch that to new players, like, hey, if you like those movies and those favorite moments, like when the Rohirrim comes up over the, up over the ridge, and you're like, oh, it's going down. That to me is what role playing is all about, and I think that's a great way to pitch it to players, at least in my world. It's like, hey, you're gonna feel that and be a part of that and have those memories.
Yeah, I think again, especially after this year, I think people are really looking for that. To kind of get back to that personal connection. I know, the board game industry has also just exploded over the past few years. I mean, the quality and workmanship and creativity that goes into board games these days is just phenomenal.
It's an art form.
Yeah, it really is. And I think I'm certainly not saying that video games are not popular. But I do think that there is a need for people, again, especially after this past year, to start, getting back together personally. And I think that's a great thing about this game, is it's not, just sit down and it's basically a night of drinking and storytelling, like you said,
Drinking with swords.
with drinking with swords, with some dice thrown in. So I think I'm really, really interested to see how this explosion in this game and community picks up over the next year as we've changed through COVID and beyond it. That sounds really advertising. You can tell I've been doing advertising my whole career.
That's right. COVID and beyond. What's going to happen?
Yeah, that was campaign week right there.
You mentioned to me several times you're excited to get back to the physical table. And I think maybe that's where you and I disagree or differ a little bit, because I really like the new medium of Zoom based, mainly because that's where my business is all online. So for me, I look at it from a business standpoint. Like I can't wait to be able to grow my business connections and games that I can host through the digital medium. But I know you seem to be really excited to get back to the table. Is there a group that you want to get together, or what are you guys playing? What's the first thing you're going to play when you can get back in person?
I think the longer I've been doing it remote, the more I see the beauty of it also. So I think I've shifted a little over to your hand. I definitely want to get back to the table, only because, again, the reason I do the setup run games the way I do is because I like that tactile feel. Roll20 is an awesome tool when you need it, but to me, it just takes D&D one step further towards a video game. So I am super excited to get back to the table, just because I like that personal kind of tactile sensation of being there. Everybody can look at the map, they can move their minis around. However, I will say that, again, had it not been for being kind of forced into the remote thing because of this last year, I'd never be playing with the people that I'm playing with. I mean, my Wednesday night game for you guys, I've got 2 players in California, one in Indiana, one in Canada, one in Washington. I mean, it's like
when you're almost 40 sessions, you're almost 40 sessions in, right? I think you're like 35 or 40
sessions. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're just over halfway through Horde of the Dragon Queen. I've really been dragging it out. I like running a very kind of realistic campaign, but I've asked them numerous times if I'm going too slow, let me know. But we are just loving it. But yeah, I would never have a chance otherwise to play with these people. Never have run across them. Would never have had a reason really, because I've still got my group here. So in that regard, I definitely, absolutely think that I will continue to maintain both. I can't see not at this point.
I, one of my favorite stories from this weird new paradigm we're in is it's like meeting people and just new faces. And I keep thinking about how many games have been played now, because the old complaint of D&D players before all this COVID stuff was, we can just never get a game. I mean, it's just so hard to get a game. And even if you did get a game, somebody had a conflict and they couldn't make it, and that to me was always the frustration of just like, oh man, we can't get the
Yeah.
whole group together. I feel like it's a lot easier to get the whole group together now, and even though people are not in person, I feel like we're building patterns
Mm-hmm.
of playing where people are all of a sudden, maybe people who wouldn't have been able to feel comfortable in person. I mean, like, you're putting yourself out there as a role player. So coming like maybe to a bar, a place with some people you don't know, and be like, oh man, I'm gonna be this elf, and I really want to be this, this crazy character, but you don't feel comfortable with it. I think the
Mm-hmm.
online medium allows people to get into that space more comfortably, and I'm just really excited to see what comes when people are able to get back together, because I think we're going to have I think the explosion in D&D is only just begun, because now we have a whole new generation of role players. Um,
I I totally agree. I would, you know what I would love to see? I would love to see a combination of both.
yeah,
Like, hey, we've got a group of 4 or 5 people, 4 people that are local, but we've also got 3 people that want to play remote and doing it that. I mean, that would be
yeah.
really freaking cool.
Well, and people are everywhere now. They're everywhere, and they all. And I mean, Wizards does a great job of advertising all this stuff. So I think
Yeah.
something like D&D
Yeah.
sales were up 33% over since COVID started, and
Oh yeah.
they were already doing this. So it's just
Yeah.
there's
The
so many
numbers
new
are.
people. It's important to welcome
Yeah.
them in. We've only got a few minutes left. What are I want to ask you something here from another one of the questions from the Instagram. So this is something somebody asked me a couple days ago that I thought would be cool to ask you. What was your first experience reading a D? Like, you first remember getting a module or a book. Like, what was the thought process the very first time you experienced a role playing game?
I actually think that it was. I can't remember if it was the basic edition set or if it was AD&D that I got into. I think it might have been AD&D already, because like I said, it was. I should know this, the publication dates of these things. It was 19 when I first got the I picked up the Player's Handbook and Monster Manual, and it was looking through those, and then I think I that's when I started to go back and collect some of the older modules, Keep on the Borderlands and
Yeah.
King of Horrors and all of that stuff. But it was, I think I just ran across those books in the comic book store when I was a kid. No, actually, it was way before comic books. It may have just been a bookstore. I don't know. It was just a random thing, and I looked through the books, and before I knew it, I had like 4 or 5 books just pouring through the content, and then it was. Um, I moved around a little bit when I was a kid and didn't really settle until like junior high. So it was actually like late junior high, early high school where I started. I finally found a group that I could play with. There was
Yeah.
some dabbling before then, but it was never serious, like
And it's tough when you're a kid to find a regular
ongoing.
group when you're just getting
Yeah,
into it, because it's a challenging thing
yeah,
to get started with. Were your
yeah. But
parents
it was those hardcover books. Yeah.
were your family? I mean, was that something that were they supportive? Did they just were they indifferent? I know that there was the satanic panic way back when. Is it something that the parents supported, that they just didn't care one way or another, or does that not really factor in?
Well, we were all already devil worshippers, so it was a perfect
Yes, they were.
segue
Yeah,
into um, no, no, no. They were. I mean, it was mostly indifference. They knew it was a big part of my adolescent life. They certainly had no problem with it. I don't think they really kind of got what it was about until
yeah.
a number of years in. But yeah, they. I mean, I had sleepovers at my buddy's house pretty much every weekend. Um, in high school years, shows you how much of a nerd I am. We
Yeah.
all were.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah.
That's
So
awesome, man. I think that would be something fun to have several people on and just talk about first experiences with role playing and like how everybody got started, because that there's a lot, I think a lot there of that reveals our experiences as players, as people. It connects into family. Like for me, it was all about my relationship with my dad, and he got me into a game called Stratomatic Baseball, which was all statistics based. And then I was also a huge Star Wars fan. So like my dad and I would always go to the bookstore together, and Borders before Borders before Borders went
before Borders
bankrupt.
was Borders.
Yeah, and then I found the Star Wars book that one of my classmates had when I was in middle school, and I was just like, this is awesome. And so he was like, okay, cool. And he didn't care one way or another. He was just happy for me that I found something I was into. But I remember that book like
Mm,
totally changed the trajectory of my life. And I think
yeah,
there's so much that's so impactful, those moments when we're young that we run into these games, or when we're for newer players that are not in their teenage years, that are in their 20s and 30s even, that are being introduced to it. So I think we should talk about that at some point
yeah,
too. So um,
absolutely. I think we've got a whole mess of questions we could
I
dedicate
know we got
time
like a whole
to.
list of stuff we got to talk about. So all right,
Yeah,
I'm Adam Scott for D&D Club.
Bryan Weiss for RPG and Company.
We're appreciative of anybody who's made it this far into this test run, and hopefully you'll be seeing a lot more content from us here soon. That's a wrap. We are out.